She walked in with grace and a flawless smile, but, within minutes, that polished calm began to crack. By the time the interview ended, millions would be asking the same question. Who really lost control? She had been booked for what was supposed to be a simple morning chat. Instead, what unfolded between Meghan Markle and Michael Strahan became one of the most talked about moments in morning television. The Good Morning America studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy. Makeup artists hurried between stations. Production assistants spoke quietly into their headsets. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the room, mixing with the faint tension that always comes before a live broadcast. Michael Strahan, the seasoned host with years of media experience, sat calmly in the green room reviewing the morning's rundown. He had interviewed world leaders, athletes, and Hollywood stars. But today's guest had created a very different kind of anticipation. Meghan Markle, the former Duchess of Sussex, actress, humanitarian, and frequent headline maker, was scheduled for a special live segment. Officially, the conversation was meant to focus on her latest philanthropic initiative and a new wellness documentary. Unofficially, the producers knew the interview could drift into unpredictable territory. Meghan had remained a constant presence in the headlines. Netflix projects, royal tensions, and ongoing speculation about her marriage. Still, Michael had no intention of ambushing her. That wasn't his style. Meghan arrived early. She was posed and courteous, dressed in an elegant ivory pantsuit that balanced royal formality with Hollywood polish. She greeted the crew warmly, complimented the flowers on set, and even joked with one of the producers. But beneath the smooth confidence, behind the effortless posture and practiced smile, there was something else, a faint glint that was difficult to read. At exactly 8:17 a.m., the red light above camera 3 switched on. They were live. Michael flashed his signature smile. Good morning, America. We have a very special guest with us today. Meghan Markle is here to talk about her latest work, her new documentary, and of course life beyond the spotlight. Meghan, welcome back to the show. Thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure, she replied smoothly, her voice calm and carefully measured. The first 5 minutes unfolded exactly as planned. They discussed the wellness series, motherhood, and her community project. Safe, comfortable topics. Meghan answered confidently, weaving in familiar themes: authenticity, healing, growth. But then Michael made a subtle shift. So Meghan, he began gently, you've worn many hats: actress, activist, member of the royal family. But when you look back at your acting career now, how do you see it? Did it prepare you for the level of public scrutiny that came later? For a moment, Meghan's expression remained unchanged. Then her eyes narrowed slightly. Well, I think it's a bit reductive to focus on my acting when there's so much more to who I am now, Michael. Michael nodded. Of course, but don't you think those earlier roles shaped how people first came to know you? Meghan let out a short, clipped laugh. Perception is a fascinating thing. People often believe what they're told, especially when the media repeats it enough. There was a subtle chill in her voice now. In the control room, producers noticed it immediately. One of them murmured into a headset. Michael remained composed, leaning forward slightly. Fair point, he said, though I'd argue interviews like this give people a chance to hear directly from you. Meghan's smile faltered just for a moment. I suppose that depends on whether the questions are thoughtful. A quiet pause settled between them, long enough for viewers at home to notice, but Michael had handled tense interviews before. He simply turned to his next card. You know, he continued, there's been a lot of speculation about your relationship with the press. Some people say it contributed to the breakdown between you and the royal family. Looking back, do you think that's fair? That was the moment her smile finally cracked. Meghan leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs deliberately. That's an oversimplification, she said. I stepped away because I wanted peace, because I wanted my children to grow up in a world where their mother isn't constantly dissected on national television. Ironically, here I am again. Michael raised an eyebrow slightly. And yet, you've remained very public since then. Documentaries, podcasts, interviews like this one. Some might say you stepped out of one spotlight only to create another. The air in the studio tightened. Meghan responded with a cool smile. Are you suggesting that speaking on my own terms is the same thing as being chased by tabloids? Not at all, Michael replied calmly. I'm simply pointing out that it doesn't exactly look like a retreat from public attention. The camera zoomed in slightly. The tension had quietly become part of the segment itself. Unlike tabloids, Meghan said sharply, I get to choose the narrative. That's something you might not fully understand unless you've lived it. Michael remained unfazed. I'd argue that as someone who's spent decades in the public eye, worked in both journalism and professional sports, Michael continued calmly, I'd say I understand the pressure of public perception better than most. For a moment, the comment lingered in the air. To professional, sat across from each other, locked in a quiet contest for control. Michael shifted direction slightly, keeping his tone measured. Let me ask you this, he said. Do you think your departure from royal duties had anything to do with your background, your upbringing, your career in Hollywood? Did any of that clash with what the monarchy expected? Meghan didn't hesitate. If you're asking whether I was too American for the monarchy, she said, then yes, and I wear that like a badge of honor. A few people in the audience chuckled awkwardly. Michael offered a polite smile, though his eyes studied her carefully. And has that cultural difference affected your relationship with Prince Harry? Her tone changed again, cooler, sharper. My marriage isn't public entertainment, Michael. I came here to discuss meaningful work, not indulge tabloid fantasies. No disrespect intended, Michael replied evenly, but people are curious. The two of you have become symbols of change, and part of that story is how you support one another through it. Symbols, Meghan repeated, sounding amused, or targets. There was no humor in her voice. The studio had gone unusually quiet. Crew members froze in place, waiting to see what would happen next. Michael kept his composure. I suppose it depends who you ask, he said. Some believe you've reshaped public narratives. Others think the line between privacy and publicity has become blurred, and some, Meghan said flatly, just enjoy hearing themselves talk. A ripple shot through the control room. Did she really just say that? One producer whispered. Michael remained unfazed. He leaned back slightly and nodded. Double quotes well. I hope I'm asking questions our viewers care about, and I hope viewers care about things that actually matter, Meghan shot back, folding her arms. Mental health, education, equity, not whether my marriage is interesting to tabloids. Michael's smile tightened slightly. Then let's talk about that, he said. At that moment, the tone of the interview changed completely. The lines had been drawn civil on the surface, but unmistakably sharp beneath it, and the tension was still building. Inside the Good Morning America studio, the air felt heavier now. Michael Strahan shifted in his seat, maintaining the practiced composure of a veteran broadcaster, but behind the calm expression was something firm resolve. Meghan's posture had changed too. She no longer leaned forward or offered the polished public smile she had arrived with. Instead, she sat back, relaxed, almost defiant, lightly tapping the corner of a cue card resting on the table. Michael cleared his throat. Meghan, I appreciate your perspective on the media. But let's pivot to something many viewers are curious about: your transition from acting into royal life. Do you think your time in Hollywood prepared you for Buckingham Palace? For a moment, Meghan blinked as if she hadn't expected the question so soon. Then the smile returned, cooler than before. You mean whether playing a paralegal on Suits prepared me to sit beside the Queen? She said. No, Michael, I wouldn't call that preparation. It's a rather odd comparison. Michael held her gaze. Not really. Many people make dramatic career transitions. I'm wondering whether your experience in the public eye, handling scrutiny, balancing personal expression with public expectations, helped in that environment. Meghan's eyes narrowed slightly. I think what you're really asking, she said, is whether I was ever worthy of that role. No, Michael replied smoothly. I'm asking whether your past experiences helped or complicated the transition, and whether you felt prepared. Meghan let out a short, humorless laugh. Prepared for a family that treated me like a prop in their historical drama. No script in Hollywood could prepare someone for that. Behind the cameras, producers began shifting in their seats. The director quietly mouthed two words. Let it play. Everyone knew the interview had entered unpredictable territory. Michael glanced down at his notes and turned the page. Let's talk about the decision to step back from royal duties, he said. There's been speculation that tensions weren't only with the press, but also within the palace itself. Meghan's expression hardened. Oh, here we go, she muttered under her breath. Michael raised an eyebrow but continued. There were reports unconfirmed, of course, that some of those tensions involved your own behavior, that perhaps some people felt you weren't interested in adapting to the institution. A brief pause followed. Someone off camera inhaled sharply. Meghan didn't blink. And I suppose, she said coolly, you're quoting those mysterious palace insiders again, right? The ones who never show their faces. She continued coolly, but somehow always have plenty to say. Michael didn't respond. The silence itself was his move. Meghan lowered her voice slightly. Look, I know it's easy to paint me as the difficult one. People love that narrative, especially when it involves a woman, especially a woman of color. But let me ask you something, Michael. Would you be asking these same questions if your guest were a man who married into the monarchy? Michael's expression didn't change. I ask every guest the questions the public wants answers to, he said calmly. That's my job. And yet, Meghan replied with a faint, condescending smile. You keep circling the same implication that somehow I caused my own problems. Michael slowly flipped one of his cue cards. Is that not a possibility? Her smirk faded. I think we both know what kind of interview this really is, she said, her voice turning icy. You're not here to learn about me. You're here to chip away at me. Politely, of course with a smile, but a chisel is still a chisel. Michael nodded slightly. I respect your point of view. But let me ask just one more question. Meghan crossed her arms. Go on. Your relationship with Prince Harry. Michael began carefully. Some tabloids have reported recent tensions, separate travels, public disagreements. Would you like to comment? This time Meghan laughed out loud. I'd rather not entertain tabloid nonsense, Michael. If your questions are going to be based on supermarket headlines, maybe you should be the one playing a paralegal. The remark landed sharply behind the cameras. A few staff members winced. Michael blinked once, then smiled, but it wasn't his usual television smile. It was the kind that suggested the moment had revealed more than words could. I ask about your marriage, he said evenly, because your audience, the people who supported you and rallied behind you, are wondering if everything's all right. And if you don't want to answer, that's your right. But insulting the question doesn't make it disappear. Meghan shifted slightly in her seat, suddenly less at ease. You know, she said quietly, it's interesting how people pretend to be respectful while slipping in subtle digs. You've turned it into an art form, Michael, and you've perfected the art of avoiding accountability, he replied calmly. Silence, all in the control room. The director held up a hand. Don't cut. Michael glanced down at his notes. Again, let's talk about your production company, he said. Are you planning to focus more on documentaries or scripted content going forward? But Meghan didn't answer. She sat there with her arms folded, eyes fixed on him like a chess player who had just realized the board had shifted. Michael allowed the silence to stretch. Meghan? He prompted gently. She blinked once, and the polished composure slipped just a fraction. I think, she said slowly, we should wrap this up. Michael nodded. If that's your decision. But everyone in the studio could feel it. The moment wasn't finished, not even close. She had entered believing she could guide the conversation, but the tone had changed. The charm had cracked, and with her composure slipping, while Strahan remained steady, the tension had reached a boiling point. What happened next left producers scrambling and viewers stunned. A thick, Electric silence filled the Good Morning America studio as Meghan crossed her legs and subtly angled her body away from Michael Strahan. It was a small gesture, but the message was clear. The gloves were off. Michael sat perfectly still, the cue cards now resting loosely in his hand. He didn't really need them anymore. "Before we close," he said calmly, "there's one more thing viewers have been talking about. Your recent comments about the monarchy, specifically when you described it as, quote, a dusty institution built on outdated ideals." Meghan tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Is that really how you want to end this, Michael?" "You said it," he replied without hesitation. "I'm simply asking if you still stand by it." "I said what needed to be said," she answered coolly. "Not everyone has the courage to speak out when something is wrong. But some people might argue," Michael said, leaning forward slightly, "that you entered an ancient system with your own expectations and became frustrated when it didn't bend to you." Her expression hardened. "I entered that system as a wife, a mother, and a humanitarian," Meghan said, her voice tightening. "Not as someone trying to stage a revolution, but when I saw what it was doing to my husband, to my mental health, I chose peace." "And the book deal?" Michael asked evenly. "The documentary series, the Spotify contract, were those about peace too?" The question landed like a dropped weight. It was the one everyone had been circling, and now it hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Meghan leaned back. For a moment, she said nothing, and somehow that silence spoke louder than any answer. "Look," she said at last, the thin layer of control beginning to fade. "I'm not here to justify my existence or every decision I've made. I have a platform, and I use it." "Isn't that what people always say? Use your voice." "Absolutely," Michael replied calmly. "But when that voice reaches millions and comes with global attention and substantial money, it also brings scrutiny. You can't opt out of that part." "And who decided you get to lecture me about scrutiny?" she snapped. Michael leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "I'm not lecturing," he said. "I'm interviewing. Or at least I was." Behind the scenes, producers stood frozen. No one was calling for a break. No one was cutting to commercial. The moment was too intense to interrupt. Meghan's jaw tightened. "You've been pushing a narrative this entire time," Michael pretending to be neutral, while bringing up every hit piece ever written about me. "I didn't write those pieces," he replied evenly, "but I read them, just like the audience does. And now you're their mouthpiece." "No," he said simply, "but I'm not yours either." The silence that followed felt volcanic. Meghan broke it with a sharp inhale. "You know what I think," she said. "I think you had this narrative plan the moment I walked in. You wanted the viral clip, the sound bite. You don't care about my work or my truth. This was a setup." Michael raised an eyebrow. "And yet," he said quietly, "you walked right into it." Her eyes flashed. "Because I believed this conversation would be different." "I thought you would be different," he shrugged lightly. "Maybe you didn't do your homework." That seemed to push her over the edge. Meghan shifted in her seat, pulling her blazer tighter around herself as though the air had suddenly turned cold. "I think we're done here," she said through clenched teeth. But Michael wasn't finished yet. "One last question," he said, holding up a final card. "You said recently in a speech that the truth has no expiration date. Do you still believe that?" Meghan didn't even look at him. "Play your clip, Michael," she said dismissively. "Get your moment." He didn't. Instead, he simply watched her, waiting. She stood up without another word. Her heels clicked against the studio floor, like a steady metronome, counting down the end of a very public unraveling. Michael remained seated, exhaling only after the backstage door closed with a faint echo across the studio. For a few seconds, the room was completely still. Then the floor director's voice cut through the silence. "We're out in 3, 2, 1. The screen faded to commercial. Back in the studio, the atmosphere remained tense enough that you could almost hear the hum of the cameras. Michael Strahan sat calmly in his chair, composed as ever, while Meghan Markle leaned forward nearby, visibly shaken. The polished image she had arrived with beginning to unravel. Let's be honest, Meghan said sharply, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. There's only so much interrogation anyone can tolerate. Michael didn't blink. You're free to answer or decline any question, Meghan. But remember, this is live television, and you agreed to be here. She let out a dry, incredulous laugh. Oh, please, don't pretend this wasn't a trap. You invited me here to promote my work, then spent 20 minutes fishing for headlines about my husband and my past. Michael calmly clasped his hands together. I asked about your career, your decisions, and your public journey. You're one of the most talked about women in the world. Meghan, I'd be doing viewers a disservice if I ignored what they're already wondering. She shot him a sharp glare. No, you'd be doing yourself a disservice pretending you're Barbara Walters. A quiet wave of gasps moved through the control room. The crew behind the cameras froze. Michael's jaw tightened slightly, though his voice remained smooth. I'm not trying to be anyone else, he said. I'm Michael Strahan. I earned my seat here just like you earned yours. But Meghan was losing patience. Let's be realistic, she said condescendingly. If my name were still just Meghan Markle, the actress from Suits, you wouldn't even have me on this show. You'd probably be interviewing another quarterback. This time Michael smiled, not out of amusement, but out of sudden clarity. You might be right, he said, but here's the difference. I'd still treat them with respect. The remark landed differently. Meghan blinked, momentarily stunned, her lips parted as if to respond. But the words didn't come. Instead, she stood up slowly, almost theatrically, like a character delivering the final line in a courtroom drama. You know what? She said, placing her microphone down on the side table. I don't have to stay here and endure this kind of amateur journalism masquerading as morning fluff. Michael didn't flinch. You're free to leave, he said evenly, but walking out doesn't make the questions or your answers disappear. She adjusted her ivory blazer over beige trousers, chin high, voice cold, and staying doesn't make your questions any less shallow. With that, she turned, striding toward the exit. The studio doors barely moved, but the weight of the moment made it feel as though they'd slammed shut. Cameras kept rolling. Michael remained seated, calm, then leaned slightly toward the camera. Well, he said, pausing for effect. Live TV. Folks, sometimes you get inspiration, sometimes confrontation, and sometimes someone walking out because they didn't like the questions. He smiled again, but there was steel behind it this time. We'll be right back. The screen cut to commercial, but the moment didn't fade. By noon, the clip had gone viral. So, what do you think? Was Michael out of line with his questions, or did Meghan let her defensiveness take over? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more unfiltered, dramatic celebrity moments that went off script, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Eco Stories, because sometimes the most shocking moments are the ones that weren't planned.